For 60 years, they built a life on love until a deathbed confession threatened to unravel everything. How far would you go to protect the ones you love, even from the truth? The hospital room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Eleanor Wilson lay in her bed, her once vibrant blue eyes now faded and tired, her white hair spread across the pillow like a silver halo. At 83, her body was finally surrendering after a long battle with cancer. Beside her sat James Wilson, her husband of 60 years, his dark hands gently holding her pale ones, his brown skin contrasting against the white hospital sheets. At 85, James's face carried the deep lines of a life fully lived, his eyes holding both love and deep concern as he watched his wife drift in and out of consciousness. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Their daughter, Sarah, hovered nearby, her mixed-race features reflecting both her parents. Her mother's delicate nose and her father's warm brown eyes. At 55, Sarah was the physical embodiment of their love story, a story that had defied societal norms and prejudices of the 1960s, when a white woman and a black man choosing to build a life together was met with hostility from all sides. "James," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible above the machines. "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." Her eyes filled with tears as she struggled to find the words. James leaned closer, gently stroking her hair. "What is it, Ellie? After 60 years, there's nothing that could change how I feel about you." Eleanor closed her eyes, gathering strength. "I've kept a secret. All these years. A terrible secret that I was too afraid to share." She paused, each word seeming to drain her remaining energy. "When Sarah leaves, I need to tell you alone." Sarah, noticing her mother's distress, stepped forward. "Mom, you should rest. Whatever it is can wait." Eleanor shook her head weakly. "No, it can't wait anymore. I need to make things right before I go." James and Eleanor had met in 1963 at a civil rights demonstration in Chicago. Eleanor, then 23, was a nursing student who had defied her wealthy conservative parents to join the movement. James, 25, was a brilliant medical student working tirelessly for equality while pursuing his dream of becoming a doctor. Their eyes had met across a crowded room where strategy sessions were being held, and something had sparked between them. Something neither could deny, despite knowing the world would not make it easy. Their courtship had been conducted in secret at first. Coffee shops in neighborhoods where they wouldn't be recognized, walks in parks at dusk, letters exchanged through mutual friends. When they finally decided to marry, Eleanor's parents had disowned her completely. Her father, a prominent banker with deep Southern roots, had threatened to cut her off without a penny. Her mother had wept and begged her to reconsider, warning that she would face a life of hardship and hatred. James's family had been more accepting but concerned. His mother, a strong-willed woman who had raised 3 sons alone after her husband, died, worried about the difficulties her son would face but ultimately supported his choice. His brothers were protective, but welcomed Eleanor once they saw how genuinely she loved James. The early years had been difficult. Finding housing was nearly impossible, with landlords refusing to rent to them. James struggled to secure a residency despite graduating at the top of his class. Eleanor was fired from her first nursing job when her supervisor discovered who her husband was. But they persevered, bound by a love that seemed to grow stronger with each obstacle they overcame. By 1970, things had begun to improve. James had established himself as a respected cardiologist, his skill and dedication eventually overcoming the prejudice he faced. Eleanor had found work at a progressive hospital where her marriage was not held against her. They had purchased a small home in a transitioning neighborhood, and Sarah had come along, bringing new joy into their lives. Their home became a sanctuary, a place where they could simply be a family, away from the stares and whispers that still followed them in public. They filled it with books and music, art from both their cultures, and the warm smell of Eleanor's baking mixed with the spicy aromas of recipes James had learned from his mother. As the years passed, they weathered the storms that all marriages face: financial struggles when James opened his own practice, the heartbreak of 2 miscarriages after Sarah, the death of James's mother, and the continued silence from Eleanor's family. Through it all, they had each other, and that seemed to be enough. The 1980s brought new challenges as Sarah entered her teenage years and faced her own struggles with identity and belonging. Neither fully accepted in white nor black communities, she rebelled, searching for where she fit in a world still struggling with race. Eleanor and James united to support their daughter, their bond strengthening as they guided her through those difficult years. By the 1990s, their persistence had paid off. James's practice was thriving, Eleanor had become a nursing director, and Sarah had graduated college and begun her own career in law. They had moved to a larger home in a better neighborhood where they were treated with respect, if not always, warmth. Now, in the sterile hospital room, James waited anxiously after Sarah had left to get coffee. Eleanor's breathing had become more labored, and he sensed that whatever she needed to tell him was weighing heavily on her. "James," she whispered, her voice stronger now that they were alone. "I've kept something from you. Something unforgivable." James squeezed her hand. "Nothing is unforgivable, Ellie. Not after all we've been through." Eleanor turned her face away, unable to meet his eyes. "Before I met you, I was engaged to someone else. A man my parents approved of, from a good family." Her voice turned bitter on these last words. "When I broke it off to be with you, he was furious. He threatened me, said I would regret choosing—" She hesitated. "Choosing you over someone of my own kind." James nodded silently. This wasn't news to him. Eleanor had mentioned this former relationship early in their marriage. "What I never told you," she continued, her voice breaking, "was that a month after we married, he came to see me when you were working night shifts. He was drunk, angry. He said he wanted to teach me a lesson about lying down with—" She couldn't finish the hateful phrase. James's blood ran cold as he began to understand. "Did he hurt you, Ellie?" Eleanor's tears flowed freely now. "Yes. I fought him, but he was stronger. Afterward, he told me if I ever told anyone, especially you, he would kill you. He had connections, money. I believed him." James's hands trembled as he processed what she was saying. "And Sarah—" Eleanor nodded slowly, the terrible truth finally emerging. "I was already pregnant when it happened, about 3 weeks. I always believed she was yours. I needed to believe it. But as she grew, older, sometimes I would see little things, the shape of her hands, the way she laughed, and I would wonder." James sat in stunned silence, his mind racing through decades of memories, re-examining every moment with this new lens. "I had a DNA test done last year," Eleanor whispered. "I needed to know before I died. Sarah is not biologically yours, James. I'm so sorry. I've lived with this lie for our entire marriage." James stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, life continued normally. Doctors hurried between buildings, visitors arrived with flowers, a groundskeeper trimmed hedges. How could everything look so normal when his world had just been shattered? 60 years of marriage, 60 years of what he thought was honesty and trust between them. A daughter he had loved fiercely from the moment she was born, taught to ride a bike, walk down the aisle at her wedding. Not his blood. "Why tell me now?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. "Why not take this to your grave?" Eleanor struggled to sit up. "Because you deserve the truth. And because I need your forgiveness before I go." Her voice broke. "I've lived with this guilt every day of our marriage, wondering if I should tell you, afraid of what would happen if I did." Afraid you would leave us both. James turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. The man who did this. What happened to him? He died in 1980. Car accident. I saw it in the newspaper. Eleanor's voice was flat. I felt nothing when I read it. Nothing at all. James returned to the bedside chair, his movements slow and deliberate. Does Sarah know? Eleanor shook her head. No, I couldn't bear to tell her. She adores you. You're her father in every way that matters. The room fell silent except for the constant beeping of machines. James stared at his hands that had delivered babies, performed surgeries, held his daughter when she cried, caressed his wife for decades, hands that had built a life on what he now knew was partly a lie. Hours passed. Sarah returned but sensed the tension and soon left again, promising to come back in the morning. Night fell, casting shadows across the hospital room. James remained at Eleanor's bedside, still processing, still thinking. I don't know what to say to you. He finally spoke into the darkness. I'm angry, Ellie. Angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth back then. Angry that you let me live a lie. Eleanor's tears came again. I know. But, James continued, his voice softening slightly, I'm trying to understand. You were scared. You were protecting all of us in the only way you thought you could. He reached for her hand again. I need you to understand something too. Sarah is my daughter. Nothing changes that. Not biology, not this revelation, nothing. I raised her. I loved her. I will always be her father. Eleanor nodded weakly, relief washing over her face. As for us, James continued, choosing his words carefully, 60 years is too long to throw away over a secret, even one this big. What happened to you was terrible. What you did afterward was wrong. But I can't erase 6 decades of loving you, of building a life together. He leaned closer. I need time to process this, but I want you to know that my love for you isn't conditional on perfect behavior. We've both made mistakes. This one is bigger than most, but it doesn't erase all the good we've created together. Eleanor reached up to touch his face, her fingers trembling. I don't deserve your understanding. Maybe not, James said honestly. But you have it anyway. That's what love is, Ellie. Standing by someone even when it's hard. You taught me that. All those years ago when you chose me despite everything you had to give up. As dawn broke, casting golden light across the room, Eleanor's breathing became more labored. James called for the nurse, then sat beside his wife, holding her hand as she had held his through 6 decades of challenges. I forgive you, he whispered in her ear as her eyes fluttered closed. Rest now. I'll be here. I've always been here. 3 days later, Eleanor Wilson passed away peacefully, her husband and daughter at her side. She took many secrets with her, but not the one that had burdened her for 60 years. That secret now belonged to James, who chose to keep it, protecting Sarah from a truth that would only cause pain. The morning of Eleanor's funeral dawned with a gentle rain that seemed to mirror the tears James had been unable to shed since her passing. He stood before the mirror, his weathered hands struggling with the tie that Eleanor had always helped him with. For 60 years, she had been there, straightening his collars, brushing lint from his shoulders, offering a reassuring smile before they faced the world together. Now he was alone, carrying a truth that felt both liberating and crushing in its weight. The church was filled beyond capacity. James hadn't realized how many lives Eleanor had touched until he saw them gathered in one place. Former nursing, students now distinguished medical professionals themselves, patients whose lives she had helped save during her decades of service, neighbors who remembered her kindness during difficult times, and friends who had stood by them through years, when much of society had not. The pews were filled with faces of every color, a testament to Eleanor's ability to see beyond superficial differences to the humanity beneath. Sarah stayed close to his side throughout the service, her husband Marcus and their 3 children, forming a protective circle around them both. At 55, Sarah had her mother's delicate features, but carried herself with a confidence that James had always believed came from him. Now he wondered what other traits he had mistakenly attributed to his own genetics, rather than recognizing them as uniquely hers. He watched her comfort her 20-year-old twins, Michael and Madison, and their older brother, James Jr., who at 28 was already establishing himself as a promising surgeon, following in what everyone believed were his grandfather's footsteps. When it came time for James to speak, he made his way to the pulpit with slow, deliberate steps. The faces before him blurred through tears he finally allowed himself to shed. Eleanor Wilson was not perfect, he began, his deep voice steady despite his grief. None of us are. But she was perfectly suited to be my partner for 60 years of challenges and triumphs. When we met in 1963, the world didn't want us to be together. Her family disowned her. Landlords wouldn't rent to us. Employers found reasons to let us go. But Eleanor never wavered. She chose love every single day, even when love was the harder path. He paused, feeling the weight of Eleanor's secret pressing against his heart. How easy it would be to reveal it now, to share the burden he carried. But as he looked at Sarah's tear-stained face, at the grandchildren who carried Eleanor's legacy forward, he knew he would protect her memory as fiercely as she had protected their family. Eleanor taught me that family isn't something that happens to you. It's something you build, choice by choice, day by day, through sacrifice and forgiveness and unwavering commitment. She wasn't just my wife. She was my compass, my sanctuary, my home. After the service, the family gathered at the church hall for the reception. James found himself surrounded by well-wishers sharing memories of Eleanor that spanned decades. Dr. Josephine Parker, now the chief of surgery at the hospital, where Eleanor had worked, spoke of how Eleanor had mentored her when others had dismissed her ambitions. I was the only black woman in my nursing program in 1982, Josephine explained, her voice thick with emotion. Your wife took me under her wing, pushed me to apply to medical school when I didn't believe it was possible. She said if her husband could become a cardiologist in the 60s, I had no excuse not to aim just as high in the 80s. James smiled at the memory of Eleanor's fierce advocacy. That sounds like my Ellie. As the afternoon wore on, James found himself watching his grandchildren with a new perspective. Michael had Eleanor's artistic talent and had already won several scholarships for his paintings. Madison had her grandmother's nurturing spirit and was studying nursing at the same school where Eleanor had once been unwelcome because of whom she loved. And James Jr., who everyone said was the spitting image of his grandfather, carried himself with a quiet dignity that James recognized not from a mirror, but from memories of his own father. These children were Eleanor's legacy, regardless of biology. They carried forward the values and love that he and Eleanor had built their lives around. As he watched them comforting their mother and each other, James realized that families are not made by blood alone. They are forged through love, commitment, and choice. 1,000 small decisions to stand by one another despite whatever storms may come. When the last guests had departed and the family prepared to leave the church, Sarah approached her father with concern etched across her features. Dad, why don't you come stay with us for a few days? I don't like the thought of you going back to that empty house alone. James embraced his daughter, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. The same brand Eleanor had always worn, a gift from Sarah every Christmas. I need some time alone with her memories, sweetheart, but I promise I'll come for Sunday, dinner this weekend. The drive home was the longest of James's life. Each familiar landmark held memories of Eleanor, the park where they had walked every Sunday morning for decades, the small cafe where they had celebrated each anniversary. With the same chocolate cake, the community center where they had taught literacy classes together after retirement. Their life together had been woven into the very fabric of this community that had eventually embraced them, though not without years of struggle first. The house stood silent when he entered, Eleanor's absence palpable in every room. Her reading. Glasses still lay on the side table next to her favorite chair. Her gardening gloves rested by the back door, waiting for hands that would never wear them again. In the kitchen, the calendar hung with her neat handwriting marking doctor's appointments she would never attend and lunch dates she would never keep. James moved through the rooms like a man underwater, touching the evidence of their shared life. 60 years of accumulated memories surrounded him, photographs chronicling their journey from young activists to retired grandparents, souvenirs from travels they had saved decades to take, books they had read aloud to each other during long, winter evenings. In their bedroom, Eleanor's presence was strongest. Her scent lingered on her pillow, and her nightgown lay folded at the foot of the bed where the hospice nurse had placed it after helping James pack for the hospital 3 weeks earlier. With trembling hands, he opened her jewelry box, finding the simple gold band he had placed on her finger 60 years ago. She had removed it before the hospital, worried it might be lost if her fingers swelled from the treatments. James slipped the ring into his pocket and made his way to the study, where decades of their life together were documented in carefully labeled photo albums. He pulled out their wedding album from the shelf. The pages were yellowed now, the black, and white photos capturing a young couple full of hope and determination. He traced Eleanor's face with his finger, remembering the 19-year-old girl who had defied her wealthy family and society to stand beside him. The photographs told a story that looked seamless on paper. Their small wedding attended by his family and a few brave friends, their first apartment, Sarah's birth, graduations, holidays, anniversaries. But James knew the gaps between these captured moments had been filled with struggles invisible to the camera's eye. The nights Eleanor had cried herself to sleep after another letter to her parents was returned unopened. The times James had come home seething with quiet rage after being passed over for promotions given to less qualified white colleagues. The painful conversations they'd had with Sarah when she came home from school, asking why some children weren't allowed to play with her. And now James knew there had been another invisible struggle, Eleanor's private battle with the secret she had carried for 6 decades. He tried to imagine her fear in those early days of their marriage, pregnant and traumatized, believing that revealing the truth might cost her not only her husband, but possibly his life. In 1963, would the police have believed a white woman who accused a prominent white man of assault, especially when she had willingly married a black man? Would they have protected James if her attacker had followed through on his threats? As midnight approached, James found himself in the kitchen, making tea exactly as Eleanor had taught him during their first year together. The familiar ritual brought her closer somehow. He carried the cup to their back porch, where they had spent countless evenings watching the sunset over their carefully tended garden. "We made it, Ellie," he whispered to the night sky, imagining her spirit somewhere among the stars. "Despite everything, we made it." The days that followed established a new rhythm to James's life. Each morning, he woke and spoke to Eleanor's photograph on his nightstand, updating her on his plans for the day. He continued their shared routines, watering her beloved orchids on Tuesdays, volunteering at the community center on Thursdays, calling Sarah every evening at 8 o'clock sharp. 2 weeks after the funeral, he received a letter with no return address. The elegant handwriting was instantly familiar, though he hadn't seen it in decades. Eleanor's younger sister, Catherine, who had obeyed their parents' decree to cut all contact with Eleanor 60 years ago, had seen the obituary. "I was a coward," she wrote, "while Eleanor was brave enough to follow her heart and build a life of meaning. I lived in the shadow of our parents' expectations. I have followed your lives from afar, clipping newspaper articles when James opened his cardiology practice, when you were honored for your community work, when Sarah graduated law school. I have a file inches thick documenting the life my sister built with you, a life I was too afraid to be part of. I don't ask for forgiveness, only for the chance to know my niece and her children before it's too late for me as well. James sat with the letter for several days, unsure how to respond. Would Eleanor want him to welcome her sister now, after 6 decades of silence? Or would she see it as a betrayal of all they had endured together? Finally, he decided that Eleanor had carried enough secrets. Opening doors rather than closing them would be the greater tribute to her memory. The following Sunday, James brought Catherine's letter to dinner at Sarah's house. After the meal, when the grandchildren had gone to watch a movie in the basement, he shared it with his daughter. "I never knew you had an aunt," Sarah said, stunned by this revelation. "Mom never mentioned a sister." James took her hand. "There are many things your mother couldn't bring herself to speak about. The pain of being cut off from her family was too great. But I think she would want you to know your aunt now, if you're willing." As Sarah read the letter, her eyes filling with tears, James felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. This was just the first step in a longer journey of bringing truth to their family story. Not the devastating truth of Sarah's biological origins, which he would carry to his grave, but the healing truths of reconnection and second chances. The months that followed, James began the careful process of sorting through Eleanor's belongings. Each item held memories: her favorite blue sweater that had always matched her eyes, the collection of nursing textbooks she had used to teach, generations of students, the recipe cards written in her precise handwriting, some things he donated, knowing Eleanor would want them to serve others. Some he gave to Sarah and the grandchildren, and some, like her wedding ring, he kept close, tangible reminders of the woman who had chosen him every day for 60 years. On what would have been their 61st anniversary, James visited Eleanor's grave with 61 white roses, one for each year they had known each other. He sat beside the headstone and spoke to her as if she were still beside him, sharing news of Catherine's visit, Sarah's promotion, and Madison's decision to specialize in geriatric nursing. "I'm keeping my promise to you," he told her. "Our family remains whole, built on the foundation of love we created together. Your secret has not diminished what we built. If anything, knowing what you endured has only made me appreciate your strength more deeply." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, James placed a hand on the cool marble of Eleanor's headstone. "In the end, my Ellie, I've come to understand that your secret, terrible as it was, did not define our marriage. What defined us was how we faced the world together, created a home together, raised our daughter together. The love we built was real, even if it was founded partly on a lie you told to protect us all." James rose slowly, his aged joints protesting the movement. He had made peace with Eleanor's secret and with his decision to protect Sarah from a truth that would only cause pain. Some might judge this choice as another deception, but James knew it was an act of love, just as Eleanor's silence had been, in its own complex way. "The truth that matters most," he said as he placed a final kiss on his fingertips, and then on Eleanor's name etched in stone, "is that we chose each other, every day, through 60 years of a world that often didn't want us to succeed. And in that choosing, we created something beautiful that outlasts both of us." As he walked back to his car, James felt Eleanor's presence beside him, as real as the memories they had created together. Their story, complicated, imperfect, but ultimately triumphant, would continue through Sarah and her children, through the lives they had touched, and through the quiet dignity with which they had faced every challenge. Some secrets are burdens too heavy to bear alone, but some secrets, once shared, can be transformed into something else entirely. a testament to the enduring power of forgiveness, the healing nature of truth, and the remarkable resilience of love that chooses to remain even when given every reason to depart.